Hey everyone, and a massive, hearty welcome back to the channel. So great to have you here. Before we set sail into some seriously fascinating history, I want to take a quick moment to send you all the very best. Genuinely hope you're feeling strong, healthy, and ready for an adventure today. Look after yourselves. Close your eyes. Picture a Viking. What do you see? Probably a giant, screaming brute with a horned helmet, swinging a bloody axe, burning a monastery, right? That's the image we've been fed for centuries, the terrifying, mindless barbarians from the frozen north. But what if I told you that picture is almost completely wrong? What if the real story of the Vikings is 1,000 times more complex, more surprising, and frankly, more impressive? Forget the horned helmets, they never existed. Forget just the raiding, that was only a tiny part of their lives. The truth about the Vikings: they were fearless explorers who reached America 500 years before Columbus. They were master craftspeople and ingenious shipbuilders whose designs were centuries ahead of their time. They were savvy traders whose network stretched from the Arctic to the Middle East. They were farmers, poets, lawmakers, and settlers who permanently reshaped the map of Europe. They even had surprisingly progressive ideas about women. The real Vikings weren't just mindless destroyers, they were one of the most dynamic, influential, and misunderstood cultures in history. Get ready to have everything you thought you knew turned upside down. Let's start by shattering that biggest myth once and for all: horned helmets. Seriously, toss that image right out of your mind. There is zero archaeological evidence, not a single Viking Age helmet ever found, that had horns. Not one. Think about it practically: horns on a helmet in a close combat shield wall. They'd be a massive liability, easily grabbed by an enemy to yank your head down. So where did this idea come from? Blame 19th century artists and opera costume designers, especially for Wagner's Ring Cycle. They wanted a dramatic, primitive look, and the horns stuck in the popular imagination. Real Viking helmets were actually quite practical, often simple iron or leather caps, sometimes with a guard for the nose and eyes, designed for protection, not decoration. So, the next time you see a horned helmet, remember, it's pure Hollywood fantasy, not history. So, who were the Vikings, and where did they come from? The term Viking itself is actually more of a job description than an ethnicity. It comes from the Old Norse word Vikingur, which essentially meant a pirate, raider, or someone who goes on an overseas expedition. The people themselves were Scandinavians, from what are now Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Their homeland wasn't just frozen wasteland, it had fertile valleys, dense forests, long coastlines, and fjords. But it was also tough. Farming land was limited, especially in Norway's mountainous terrain. Inheritance customs often meant only the eldest son inherited the family farm, leaving younger sons to seek their fortune elsewhere. Population growth put pressure on resources. And crucially, they possessed an incredible piece of technology: the Viking longship. This wasn't just a boat, it was the key to their entire story. Built with overlapping planks, clinker-built. For flexibility and strength, with a shallow draft, meaning it didn't need deep water, and powered by a large, square sail or oars, the longship was fast, agile, and could cross open oceans or sail far up shallow rivers. It could land on beaches, navigate narrow waterways, and withstand brutal North Atlantic storms. This ship gave them the ability to go anywhere, for trade, exploration, or, yes, raiding. It made them masters of the sea. Life back home in Scandinavia during what historians call the Viking Age, roughly 793 AD to 1066 AD, wasn't all about raiding. Most Vikings were actually farmers, fishermen, and craftspeople. They lived on isolated farms or in small villages. They grew barley, rye, oats, and vegetables. They raised cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. Fishing, especially in Norway, was vital for survival. They were skilled at working with wood, metal, bone, and textiles. Viking blacksmiths forged strong tools and weapons. Woodworkers built not just ships, but sturdy houses, furniture, and intricate carvings. Women played incredibly important roles. They ran the farm and household entirely when the men were away, which could be for months or even years. They managed food production, made clothing, cared for children and the elderly, and handled trade at the local level. They had significant rights compared to many other women in Europe at the time. They could own property, inherit land, get a divorce, and reclaim their dowries if the marriage ended. Some women, particularly those buried with keys, symbolizing control of the household, or scales, suggesting trade, clearly held considerable status and economic power. Norse society was organized around family clans and loyalty to local chieftains. They gathered at assemblies called things, yes, that's where the English word comes from, which were outdoor meetings where free men could discuss disputes, make laws, and decide on community matters. It was a surprisingly participatory system for the time. Now, we can't ignore the raiding. It happened, and it was brutal. The traditional starting point is the infamous raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne, a small island off the northeast coast of England, in 793 AD. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described it with horror. The ravages of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne, with plunder and slaughter. Monasteries were prime targets, not because Vikings hated Christianity specifically. They often targeted Christian sites belonging to rival Norse groups too, but because monasteries were usually undefended, located on isolated islands or coasts, and packed with easily portable wealth, gold and silver religious objects, jeweled book covers, silks, and enslaved people. The shock of this raid on a holy place reverberated throughout Christian Europe. These early raids were often hit-and-run affairs, carried out by small groups during the summer months. The Vikings exploited their ships' speed and surprise. They weren't looking for land yet, they were after quick riches, slaves, a major part of their economy, and prestige. Success in raiding brought a young man's status, wealth to buy land or start a farm, and stories to tell. It was a way to prove yourself. Over time, these raids grew larger and more organized. Chieftains assembled bigger fleets. They didn't just raid coasts, they sailed far up rivers like the Seine in France, the Loire, and deep into Russia, striking inland towns. The sight of a dragon-prowed longship appearing silently from the mist became the stuff of nightmares across Europe. This era of terror earned them names like Northmen, Norsemen, or Danes, even if they came from Norway or Sweden too, and the term Viking became synonymous with pirate. But the story doesn't end with raiding. Very quickly, the Vikings shifted from just taking stuff to trading and settling. They realized there was more sustainable wealth to be gained through commerce and colonization. Their trade networks were astonishingly vast. They sailed east across the Baltic Sea, down the rivers of Russia, like the Volga and Dnieper, reaching the Byzantine Empire's capital, Constantinople, which they called Miklagard, the Great City, and even Baghdad in the Abbasid Caliphate. They traded furs from the north, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory, honey, slaves, and high-quality iron tools and weapons. In return, they brought back silver coins. Arabic dirhams were especially prized, silks, spices, glassware, wine, and other luxuries. Huge hoards of these silver coins and jewelry, buried for safekeeping, are still found across Scandinavia and the lands they settled. They established trading towns that became major centers. Places like Hedeby in Denmark, now Germany, Birka in Sweden, and Koppang in Norway buzzed with merchants from many lands. They even set up fortified camps along rivers, like in Ireland, Dublin, Waterford, Limerick, and England, York, known as Jorvik, which often grew into permanent towns. The archaeological finds in York, especially, show a vibrant, cosmopolitan Viking city with craftspeople, traders, and families living alongside Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the Vikings is their incredible spirit of exploration. Driven by land shortages, political pressures, or simply the desire for adventure, they set out into the unknown Atlantic. Using the stars, the sun, observing birds and whales, and likely simple navigational tools, they made astounding voyages. First, they reached the Shetland and Orkney Islands, then the Faroe Islands. Around 860 AD, according to the sagas, their epic stories, a ship blown off course discovered a huge, mountainous land further west, Iceland. Settlement began in earnest around 870 AD. Iceland offered vast, uninhabited land, apart from some Irish monks who likely left. It became a thriving Viking society, famously establishing the Althing in 930 AD, one of the world's oldest parliaments. From Iceland, an explorer named Eric the Red, exiled for murder, sailed even further west around 982 AD. He found an enormous, icy land. Hoping to attract settlers, he cleverly named it Greenland. Despite the harsh climate, Norse settlements did take root on the southwestern coast for several centuries. And then, most famously, Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, around the year 1000 AD, pushed further west from Greenland. He landed in a place he called Vinland, Wineland, because he found wild grapes growing. This was the northeastern coast of North America, likely areas now in Newfoundland, Canada. Archaeological proof was found at L'Anse-aux Meadows in Newfoundland, the unmistakable remains of Norse-style turf longhouses, ironworking, and artifacts dating exactly to that time. Leif and others made several voyages, encountering indigenous peoples they called Skraelings. While the Norse settlements in Vinland didn't last long, likely due to the vast distance, harsh conditions, and conflict with the indigenous population, the fact remains. Vikings crossed the Atlantic and set foot in North America nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus was even born. That's not just raiding, that's world-changing exploration. Back in Europe, the Vikings weren't just passing through, they were putting down deep roots and changing the map forever. In England, what started as raids turned into the Great Heathen Army invasion in 865 AD. Thousands of Vikings arrived, conquering large parts of northern and eastern England, an area that became known as the Danelaw, where Danish law and customs ruled. They settled heavily, intermarried, and left a permanent mark on the English language. Words like sky, skin, knife, egg, law, die, they, them, there are all from Old Norse, place names, ending in by, Thorpe, Kirk, Ness, and even local government structures. In Ireland, they founded major coastal cities like Dublin, which became powerful Viking kingdoms for centuries. In France, after decades of raiding up the Seine and besieging Paris, the French king finally made a deal with a Viking leader named Rollo around 911 AD. He gave Rollo land around the mouth of the Seine in exchange for protection against other Vikings. This territory became Normandy, land of the Northmen. Rollo and his descendants became the Dukes of Normandy. They adopted French language and customs, converted to Christianity, but kept their fierce warrior spirit. Just over 150 years later, a descendant of Rollo, William the Conqueror, would lead the Norman invasion of England in 1066, changing English history forever. Vikings also sailed south into the Mediterranean, raiding in Spain, North Africa, and Italy. And as mentioned earlier, they traveled east, founding settlements along the rivers of Russia. They were so influential here that the very name, Russia, is thought to derive from Russ, a term for Swedish Vikings who rode down the rivers. They served as elite mercenaries and bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors, the famous Varangian Guard. What about their culture and beliefs? Before converting to Christianity, the Vikings followed the Norse religion, a complex world of gods, giants, elves, and dwarves. It wasn't a unified religion with a central church or holy book, it varied by region and time. They worshipped a pantheon of gods living in Asgard, connected to our world, Midgard, by a rainbow bridge, Bifrost. The chief god was Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, poetry, and magic, who sacrificed an eye for knowledge and hung on the world tree, Yggdrasil, to learn the secrets of the runes. He was accompanied by his magical ravens, Hugin, thought, and Munin, memory. Then there was Thor, immensely popular, the red-bearded god of thunder, strength, and protection of mankind. He wielded the mighty hammer Mjolnir, which became a powerful symbol worn as an amulet. Freya was the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, but also war and magic. Half the warriors slain in battle went to her field, Folkvang, while the other half went to Odin's hall, Valhalla. Valhalla wasn't a general heaven, it was Odin's hall where chosen warriors, the Einherjar, feasted and fought every day, preparing for the final battle at Ragnarok, the prophesied doom of the gods and the end of the world. The Vikings saw their world as dynamic and often hostile, requiring courage, strength, and loyalty to family and chieftain. They expressed their beliefs and stories through poetry, complex forms like skaldic poetry, and sagas, epic tales written down later in Iceland that blended history, myth, and legend. They also used runes, a distinctive alphabet carved on stone, wood, bone, or metal, for memorials, magic, and short messages. The Viking Age didn't last forever. Several factors led to its end. Over time, the powerful kingdoms forming in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden became more centralized and Christian. Kings like Harald Bluetooth in Denmark, yes, that's where the tech name comes from, and Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, Street Olaf, in Norway aggressively promoted Christianity, sometimes by force. Converting to Christianity wasn't just about faith, it was a political move. Christian kings gained legitimacy in the eyes of powerful European neighbors, could make alliances, and the church provided a structure for administration and control. Pagan practices were discouraged or banned. By the 11th century, Scandinavia was largely Christian. Settlements abroad, like those in Greenland, faced challenges like climate change, the Little Ice Age making farming harder, isolation, conflict with indigenous peoples, like the Inuit in Greenland, and economic shifts. The Norse Greenland settlements eventually vanished by the 15th century. The final traditional end date of the Viking Age is 1066 AD. That year, a Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, launched a massive invasion of England, aiming to reclaim the Danelaw. He was defeated and killed by the English king Harold Godwin's son at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Just weeks later, Harold Godwin's son himself was defeated and killed by William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, and descendant of Vikings, at the Battle of Hastings. The era of large-scale Viking raids and migrations was over, replaced by powerful Christian kingdoms in Scandinavia and their assimilated descendants ruling places like Normandy and England. So, what's the truth about the Vikings? It's a story far richer and more complex than the one-dimensional raiders of legend. Yes, they were fearsome warriors who raided and terrified Europe. That part is undeniable. But they were also brilliant navigators and shipbuilders who mastered the treacherous North Atlantic and reached continents unknown to Europe. They were intrepid explorers who settled vast new lands from Iceland to Greenland to, briefly, North America. They were shrewd traders whose network spanned continents, connecting cultures and economies. They were skilled craftspeople who produced beautiful jewelry, tools, and textiles. They were settlers and nation builders who founded cities and regions that still exist today, leaving an indelible mark on the languages and cultures of England, Ireland, Scotland, France, and Russia. Their society, while often hierarchical and violent, gave women more agency than many contemporary cultures. Their mythology and sagas provide a fascinating window into their worldview. They were farmers, poets, lawmakers, merchants, and pioneers. The Viking Age was a period of immense dynamism, expansion, and cultural exchange. Their legacy isn't just about destruction, it's woven into the very fabric of Europe and the North Atlantic. They weren't just the scourge of God, they were a driving force that shaped the medieval world and beyond. The next time you hear the word Viking, remember the explorers, the traders, the settlers, the craftspeople, the incredibly multifaceted people who emerged from Scandinavia and changed the course of history. Thanks so much for joining me on this voyage to uncover the real Vikings. It's a story that deserves to be told beyond the myths and horned helmets. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, give the video a thumbs up, it really helps the channel. What surprised you the most about the real Vikings? Their exploration, their trade, their women? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss our next adventure into the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay healthy, and keep exploring the incredible stories of our world.